Welcome to eXplore, where we are delving into the spectrum of our life in arts, community, and culture. I have two very special guests today that are immersed in the art world. I have Eiko Jones and Ken Blackburn. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Eiko, how about we start with you?
Sure.
Who are you? Tell us who you are.
I'm primarily have been a photographer and filmmaker in Campbell River. That's been my profession for the last 8 years.
Okay.
And it's always evolving.
Now, where did you begin, though? Were you born in Campbell River?
No, I was actually born in Whitehorse in the Yukon Territories.
Oh,
and then,
interesting.
Yeah, so I was born there, and then a few months later my parents decided to move. They weren't Canadian.
Okay.
And they moved to New Zealand, and via Central America. And I ended up growing up in New Zealand until I was about 19.
And were you on the North Island or the South
Island?
Island?
Yeah.
And what was your favorite part about the South Island of New Zealand?
The diversity. I mean, the mountains and the ocean are all really close together, and yeah, it's just lots to do there. It's similar to here, but
I was going to say, sounds
yeah.
like Vancouver Island.
Yeah, the South Island is more similar to here, and the North Island is completely different.
Okay. Now, when did you find your way back to Vancouver Island, or British Columbia, maybe?
Yeah, when I graduated high school, I went to Whistler for a couple of years, like lots of Aussies and Kiwis do, and spent 2 years there, and then went back to New Zealand after a bit of traveling around,
Okay.
and then a year after that, came back and did an expedition here, which we planned, and then ended up staying after that, and I've been here ever since, with just trips back to New Zealand.
Define expedition. What did that look like by then?
Kayaking to Alaska.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, from Vancouver.
And that was your first venture?
Yep.
And how old were you when you did that?
20.
And you kayaked all the way to Alaska?
Yep.
At
So
20?
It was like 1,500 miles of paddling for a few months.
Wow.
With a friend, yeah. So.
What was the most extraordinary part of that experience for you?
Funnily enough, when my friend and I that did it, we were all about the nature and the whales and everything, and ended up the people that we met along the way, the crazy lighthouse keepers, the fishermen, the boaties. That was the surprisingly fun part about it.
Okay.
Of course, the wilderness and the whales and everything were amazing, but what surprised us the most was the connections with these really random people we made everywhere.
Now, did you, in your experiences that you had with the wildlife, were any of them maybe dangerous?
I mean, any encounter with a wild animal could be.
Right.
I wouldn't say any of them were. I mean, we had wolves really close to us. We had bears literally pooping between where we slept. But we never felt threatened and never felt like we had any risk. We tried to be careful and do what we could. Yeah.
All right. So that was when you were 20.
Yeah.
And then what came after that?
Living in the Yukon for a couple of months to see what it was like, and when it hit minus 40, I said no. And went to Vancouver, got trained as a diver for my dive master. I'd already learned to dive in New Zealand when I was 15, and then I did my dive masters in Vancouver, so I could start working in diving, and with the goal of being an instructor and teaching and sailing, but ended up working here on the island, and that's got me to Vancouver Island, and then I've been here ever since. Okay.
So where did you evolve from the diving into photography? Where did those two intersect?
I originally was, as a diver, I was also a photographer on land for my kayak trip, and I played with underwater photography way back, just with a little old Nikon S3 camera for a few rolls of film, and then stopped diving altogether for about 13 years. So when I picked up diving again in 2010 for traveling purposes, I thought I got to photograph it as well. So I bought a cheap little, waterproof camera in a box, and did 2 really amazing diving trips with that, but realized I needed to do it properly with full SLR cameras and a housing and lights like I saw these other guys on the boat have. So that was in 2011. So I got my first proper SLR camera after those 2 trips and started into underwater photography properly at that point, and then kind of stopped taking much photos on land at that point and pretty much went to the underwater realm.
Now, when you were underwater and you were starting to explore that part as a career, like in actually developing photography underwater as a means of making a living, what were some of the hurdles that you had to overcome in the early days?
Certainly learning a lot of the new technology, like taking a regular SLR camera with 30 buttons on it and then putting it in a housing and trying to figure out what all those buttons are and how it all works and the lighting was technically something to learn, but it wasn't difficult to learn. It just took time learning. And then trying to figure out how to make something that was a hobby, taking photos, and make it into a career where I can actually get paid doing it. Okay. And that's been the biggest challenge, which has always had its ups and downs. It's very cyclical. For a couple of years, I get money from one thing, and then it dies off, and then I start taking doing different types of photography, different types of work, you know, and I get paid there for a while, and then it's just have to adapt all the time. You can never, just when I think something's perfect, it changes and I have to adapt to some other form, right? So it's always changing.
Would you say that artists by general are very adaptable just by their nature?
I would say so, yeah. There's not many rigid artists. The people that are creative, I guess, whether they're artists or any creative, is generally more flexible, more wing it, go with the flow kind of personalities, I find. So certainly being able to adapt to changes is good and see opportunities.
At what point did you move from the photography into filmography?
About 2 years ago. Since I've started focusing on the salmon in the Campbell River, I was photographing them since 2012 and kind of slowly building a library of photographs. And while I was doing that, I started just doing little video clips to have just a selection of clips. And I knew at some point I wanted to make a film about them. So whenever I was out, I would get little bits of video with different behaviors. And then, so I had a plan to make a film. And then about 2 years ago, I put a proper emphasis on the filmmaking. I actually did some film schooling with Toronto Film School, started writing synopsises, got funding to support the film.
Oh, great.
And was able to then dedicate several months in the river, buying specialized equipment, building equipment, and getting into it. And that sort of happened all over the last 2 years.
Okay.
And it's kind of been an evolution out of photography and into the film world.
Now, during the 10 years that you were really focusing on photography, how did you see the technology evolve from like 2010 to like 2018 before you moved into the filmography?
Yeah, the technology changed quite a bit, but it was in the digital realm at that point. So it's just the digital technology has gotten better, and I only really started getting back into photography digitally when the technology was good enough that it was replicating the old film kind of quality. So the technology has certainly changed, and I mean, you have to upgrade your cameras frequently and things like that if you want to keep current in the programs, but it didn't change dramatically like it did when it went from film and analog to digital. That was the biggest flip, and that was before I got back into it. With filmmaking, though, the technology changes happens quicker, and there's so many more pieces of equipment and moving parts that you need to make a film, and that the technology has advanced so far that simple things like mics and crane arms and things have become affordable to the point where an independent filmmaker with not really a budget can amass enough filmmaking equipment to actually make something. Whereas 10, 15 years ago, just a simple follow focus mechanism might be $15,000, $20,000. Now you can buy stuff for a few $100s and makes it affordable to get into it.
Right. Awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, you're watching eXplore, coming to you from the Tidemark Theatre here in Campbell River. My two guests today are Eiko Jones and Ken Blackburn. We will be right back. Stay right where you are. Welcome back to eXplore. We are coming to you from the Tidemark Theatre. We are exploring and delving into the spectrum of our life, arts, community, and culture. My guests today are Eiko Jones, a filmmaker, and Ken Blackburn. Too many titles to mention. Let's start with your titles. Ken, tell us, let's start with your museum title. What do you do at the museum?
I'm the public program manager at the museum, so I'm responsible for all the public programming that the museum puts on. And then I'm also the executive director of the Campbell River Arts Council.
All right.
And my background's actually in fine art, though. I have a master's degree in sculpture, so I kind of start with artist and work after that.
Now, we were talking about how technology has changed over the last 10 years. for Eiko with the photography and into the filmography. And I'm quite sure that over the last 50 years, which is what the Arts Council is now celebrating, they're celebrating their 50th year. How have you seen the technology around art evolve in that time period? Not that you're old enough to remember the beginning of that.
50 years, yeah. Well, the Arts Council was formed around the time of the moon landing, so I guess there's been a lot of shifts, you know.
Yeah.
But the art world, you know, you can trace it through kind of art mediums and subject matters. You know, the 60s was kind of the end of modernism, where you would kind of see the rise of conceptual art, the rise of land arts, certainly the rise of abstractions that would drift into the 70s and head towards what would be called, you know, sort of postmodernism and the rediscovery of identities and political identities and identity politics that would, you know, run through into the 90s, where, you know, you have the rise of feminism and, you know, queer cultures, and that would all start to have voices that would be contributing. And then as you approach the end of the 90s and into the 2000s, it's technology that really comes into the forefront with the rise of just how filmmaking changed to be something that everybody could be a producer with, and then of course into social medias and just the explosion of sort of communication theory and data and the implications of data that reflects back on art making, that really we're in that kind of phase now. So it's an incredible trajectory, and probably, you know, a Bible-sized coffee table book to try to describe 50 years of the progression of art from, you know, the Arts Council being formed in 1970. I guess the moon landing was 69, but yeah. And just, I mean, I just look at the change in television, even, you know, during that time period. So, and the rise of computers. So, yeah, it's been a long time.
Now, it's funny, Eiko, that you mentioned that you went back to photography when the digital technology caught up to itself and was able to replicate what the older cameras could do on film, print. And I remember having a conversation in the last year or so with Beth Boyce, who is the curator at the museum, around the devastating effect that digital technology is having on archives, because the archives are going to be empty for the last 10 years because they're not saving anything in hard copy. I mean, I think the museum is, but in general, it used to be that you printed everything and saved that as archival material. But now you've got everything saved digitally, but they're not taking a digital snapshot and saving it as a print and using that. Like, have you given any of that any thought? Either one of you? I'll open that up.
Yeah, I mean, it's the data storage, because of digital, you know, when you had a camera that had 24, 36 rolls of film, or if you're doing medium format or anything that just had individual, you would shoot way less. With digital, whether it's photography or film, you can shoot hundreds of thousands of pictures. You can just leave a camera rolling and record all this data. You need huge amounts of data storage, but you take so many pictures or video that to make a physical copy of a lot of it, you know, it'd be daunting. So that makes it more difficult. I mean, certainly some people say you should print everything off, but unless you're getting high quality prints done, that's going to change. The digital keeps a more accurate rendition of that file.
Right.
But it's got liabilities around storing digital media, right?
Right.
So.
And Ken, what about you in the print world?
In terms of archiving and sort of museum collections and community memory, I mean, digitization is fantastic. It has the ability to capture so many of the nuances of what community interactions are. And it provides really rapid search engines for researchers to be able to find a lot of material that, you know, the old paper and box kind of approach to archiving was really laborious. And also for researchers, they can research from your house now rather than travel to institutions around the world.
Right.
You know, because travel costs were one of the probably the biggest impediments to a lot of research that has gone on in the past, but now it's instantly available through online databases. So Yeah, I don't, you know, I don't think it's catastrophe in any way. I think it's really increased the ability to understand the complexities of the world, which are getting more complex all the time.
Yes.
But it provides access to the minutiae of what really makes communities tick. So yeah, you know, in the art world, you know, it gives the opportunity for a lot of just diverse mediums now rising too. But
right.
you know, it doesn't replace the traditional painting or sculpture or printmaking. Those things, I think, have actually come back in a very strong way. Mm-hmm. All you have to do is look at First Nations culture and carving.
Yes.
You know, nothing replaces the mask. So there will always be a role for the solid objects of things. Right. Digitization just expands their potential, I think.
Okay. What would you say the role of art is within a community?
We could do a whole episode on this, Mary Ruth. The arts are an amazing, resourceful, creative tool for any sector, whether you're talking about economic development or social development or cultural development, environmental development. All of those challenges in communities or issues are very complex, and they require the ability of all sectors to contribute to how to understand them. And the arts are probably the strongest facilitator of cross-pollination between sectors to be able to approach creatively whatever the challenge is, whether it's economic challenges or social, homelessness, cultural considerations, you know, now with decolonization, with Black Lives Matter, with all social unrest. It's the arts that have the ability to get to the root of storytelling. Right. And it's in the root of storytelling that you provided clues as to where A, the challenges or problems may lie, and then B and C, where the solutions can be through really positive communication and strong communication. And this is what the arts do. They foster strong communication, and they force us to think creatively. Right. And that's what we really need in these days, is creative solutions, because a lot of the roots of the challenges are in very historic injustices that have tended to be looked at from only one particular lens. And right. we need to start looking at them through multiple lenses, and the arts offer us those lenses. So,
okay.
If I could butt in there for a second too, that
sure.
I think from arts emotion too, arts create emotion, whether
right.
it's music, imagery, whatever. And when you can have somebody emotionally connect to a subject or something that's happening politically or whatever, that emotional connection causes change more than intellectual alone. So I think right. the arts have that connection to the emotional.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. That's very true.
Awesome. All right, we're going to take a short break. You are watching eXplore, coming to you from the Tidemark Theatre. We'll be right back. Welcome back to eXplore. We are coming to you from the Tidemark Theatre. My guests are Ken Blackburn, the Executive Director of the Campbell River Arts Council, and Eiko Jones, photographer and filmmaker. Now, before the break, we were talking about the importance of community and art and how they intersect. Now, in the break, Eiko, you had a very interesting observation about conservation and art and which comes first.
I don't know that any one comes first particularly, but the route that I've chosen is to create art of animals, of environments, of landscapes that I'm passionate about, that I'm involved with, and especially underwater where the average person doesn't get to, create art and have that create an emotional response or an intellectual response with people, but just show a world that is done differently than just a picture. It's art as well. And then when people buy that and put it as a print on a wall, or they watch a video or whatever, creates an emotional response, which then creates a change for that person. It might only be tiny, but it creates a change, and then that leads to questions.
Right.
Versus saying something about the subject and then showing some pictures to back it up. I'm using the art form first to create the emotional response.
Okay. And Ken, the Art and Earth Festival, that's coming up in a couple of weeks, but what was the premise of even beginning having a festival called Art and Earth? Where did that come from?
Well, actually, it relates a lot to what Eiko just said in the importance of an emotive response to any subject matter that you're looking at. The environment it has to be first and foremost one of our biggest challenges that we're facing as a planet. Now, the pandemic has kind of shifted the conversation a little bit, but the environment's not going away, and it is something that needs to have creative approaches across all sectors to be able to understand the complexity of what the problem is. It's difficult to do that continually on an intellectual basis or on a data-driven basis or science basis, because people start to tune it out. And I think that there is environmental fatigue that's been happening in the discourse, especially in media, about environmental challenges. Mm-hmm. So the thinking was Campbell River is perfectly positioned to approach the environment from so many directions, and Eiko's work is a good example of that, of underwater rivers and the health of rivers and the importance to overall environmental concerns. So how could we create a festival that would look at the complexity of the environment, but be starting from an emotive level rather than just sort of problem identification, which we tend to get a lot of in the media. And this is where the arts are powerful. Environmental artists are working to try to enhance not just our understanding of the environment, but our appreciation for it. Because it's well known that if people appreciate something and understand it, they tend to want to protect it more deeply. So the idea of the festival was to bring the arts in partnership with the environment, Greenways Land Trust, in partnership with culture and history with the museum, and with the Arts Council, with the Tidemark, with the gallery, to have a kind of broad conversation about how can we raise not just our understanding, but our appreciation and our amazement at just how complex, but how incredibly amazing Campbell River is, but I mean how amazing this planet is. So how could we do it differently? And that's what drove the idea to try to create a new festival to celebrate that.
And one of the other gems in Campbell River, of course, is the Haig Brown House, which the Campbell River Museum oversees. So, and of course they were naturalists, world renowned. And that dovetails perfectly with the messaging that you're talking about. Absolutely,
yeah, because we have, I've managed the Haig Brown Festival for 15 years now, and it was very much about the legacy of Roderick and Anne Haig Brown, not just environmental, but also social justice issues with Anne and her work with the Transition House and Women. And folding that into the need for having a yearly touchstone, not just a festival, but the need to create a lecture and to have what is kind of the advanced writing and or filmmaking, as we've also done over the years, in environmental thinking. And why couldn't we create out in Campbell River a yearly lecture that would address leading issues within the environmental world, and establish that lecture as a real West Coast kind of statement to the world. So Eiko will be our lecturer this year, and it will be our 11th annual Haig Brown lecture. So with the combination of Art and Earth and Haig Brown Festival kind of merging the use of Sybil Andrews Cottage and the Haig Brown property as heritage properties in town, and then with the rise of the lecture kind of combining, we're getting a very strong set of concepts or set of events that we've clustered together to talk about the environment through the arts. So.
Okay. So this year's Arts and Earth Festival, give us the lowdown on how that's going to unfold in this world of COVID.
Well, very good question, Mary Ruth. Yeah, obviously a big shift. One of the key things for people to understand about the environment is firsthand experiences. Get out into nature, which Greenways Land Trust, traditionally does a lot of walks. So we had to just cut back. We have gone online for most of it. You know, Eiko's lecture, the Haig Brown lecture, will be live streamed from this stage at the Tidemark. The Stewardship Awards will be live streamed from this stage in the Tidemark, and then we will be releasing short kind of videos produced by Greenways Land Trust, produced by the museum, produced by the Arts Council, that will be over that weekend of the 25th, 26th, 27th, as well as the art gallery kind of kicking us off with the opening of their exhibit on the 24th. So it's a challenge, but we need to keep the conversation going. We can't just say, okay, we're going to take a year off, because we can't afford to do that. So we'll just find a new way to talk about it.
Okay. It sounds really fascinating. And I love that you're going to be utilizing the Tidemark stage. And so your film, when you are giving your lecture, you're also going to show your film.
Yes, I'm going to do a like 20-minute speech talk first about my work as a salmon photographer, filmmaker, what that's entailed and some of the challenges. And then talk about the film specifically, why I made it. And then, yeah, show it on the screen for the people in the audience, and it'll be live streamed as well. And that's a 40-minute film. And that film is just about the salmon. It's their story, their journey in life, completely separate from anything we've done as humans. So it's just 100% salmon.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, that sounds absolutely fantastic, and I'm really excited to see how this unfolds in this new world of COVID. But it sounds like you've got all of the avenues covered, which is great news. And you did mention audience, but we are keeping an eye on what Dr. Bonnie Henry has to say between now and next Sunday. But it will be available streaming live online, and you can watch for the posting on Facebook and all social media as to how to be a part of the streaming. Now, it's going to stream live on what? Is it the Haig Brown website, or is it the museum website?
It will be through the Tidemark.
Through the Tidemark website?
Through their website, yes.
Okay.
And just to make, we're really hoping people will come out and support a digital ticket. I know this is the way forward for theaters and for a lot of the arts.
Yes.
Is digital experience. We're really hoping people will come and support the new platform. And just as to let people know, the film, Eiko's film, will not be available online after the lecture. It is kind of your chance to see it, because it will be held back for a release at a future date, hopefully when we can have more bodies. But
excellent. Well, Ken and Eiko, thank you so much for joining me today.
No
I've really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. You've really shed a light on arts and community for sure.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for watching eXplore, coming to you from the Tidemark Theatre. We will see you again.